So for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been doing digital art, and for the past 2 years, I really started to take it a lot more seriously. There is a lot to learn. There is definitely a lot that can just make everything super overwhelming and just really make you self-conscious about the way you draw. I'm sure most beginner and amateur artists are definitely understanding what I'm talking about right now, but I did want to go over, a couple things that maybe you could benefit from, that I definitely benefited from as I grew as an artist. The first one is probably going to be to take advantage of your creativity. I know this one sounds obvious enough. I mean, every time you see something, if you have a sketch pad, try and bring that sketch pad around with you and just sketch out whatever you see. But I mean this in the most literal sense possible. Art block happens, and it happens frequently. There's very few ways to get rid of it sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's going away. And so when you have that creative moment, like right before you're going to bed, or when you're just sitting in between shifts, on your 10, on your lunch, etc., it is very crucial to be able to take advantage of that creativity. And I found this most important in doing things like thumbnails, just little sketches of whatever pops into your mind as you're sitting there. That can go a long way. I know I've definitely had moments where I'm just lacking the key visual of the fundamental that I'm needing. So a big one is like perspective, and you could probably think about like the perspective of a leg. That is very hard to think about sometimes. And so what would help me is to just do out the doodle. And if my mind is just, too clouded that day or whatever, I at least have the doodle saved somewhere, in a sketchbook or on my tablet, whatever, and I can come back to it later. Now, that does a couple things. It allows me to save the doodle for later, and I can build upon that in a later sketch if I wanted to. But it also allows me to put both my ideas and my learning on paper. It's especially when you're in that moment of creative art block that you get your raw sense of what you do actually understand. Because when you're lacking creativity, you're only able to produce what you know. And what you know will show itself in the sketches that you're able to do. But this is also true for sometimes we know things in the back of our mind that we didn't realize we knew. And it's like if you've ever had that moment where you're just sketching out a hand and somehow you don't even know how to draw hands, but this hand looks perfect. You know what I'm talking about? It's those moments where you have the creativity just there at your leisure, and you really have to take advantage of it because you don't know when you're going to get it back. The second one is probably going to be practicing multiple techniques, mediums. Where I learned the most was definitely in charcoal practice. I've never really taken any art classes except for one, and it was a drawing fundamental class at my junior college. The best material and my favorite material, I thought I was going to hate it, that we used was charcoal. And that's me coming from a digital artist moving onto a physical medium. Charcoal really forces you to be loose, and it forces you to really learn how to pick up on the specific details that you need, but not necessarily every single detail. And this will show true in like just the overall composition of the piece, and as well as the form. Charcoal, and especially just working in grayscale in general, teaches you a shit ton about form. It's insane. And so if you're having art block, or if you're just having trouble improving, I highly suggest just taking up different mediums and practicing different techniques. Like another thing that I was recommended recently was to try doing sketches with a single weight brush. That means like any of your monopen brushes, just anything that doesn't have any line weight to it. It really is interesting how much it forces you to move quicker with the brush. It's hard to describe, so I'd recommend just trying it yourself. But my sketches did come out with a little more creativity, and it was forcing me to think, but I didn't feel overwhelmed doing the sketch. I can't recommend that, or I can't say that would do it for everybody, but you know, it doesn't hurt to try different mediums and see what you like, what you don't like, and what you can learn from each medium. Now, like your creativity, I do highly recommend to take advantage of your resources. If you ever get the opportunity to reach out to other artists, or maybe find a Discord and see if you can get critiques for your work, or just study how other artists work on their own. You know, there's tons of Discords out there where people will post their processes, post tutorials, post their works in progress, and you really get an understanding and a feel for how other artists operate at their, or what pace they work at, and their understanding of fundamentals, and you really just get a good community to be able to discuss these ideas with and learn from each other with. Alright, so something that's big for me is definitely learning about poses. I do a lot of sketch poses whenever I have the chance. I try and study anatomy, I try and study form, and I try and study how the pose itself affects the composition rather than the elements that surround the pose of an art piece. And so one of the big things for me to learn was about mileage. And mileage is essentially the amount of information that you build up over time, to which you're able to then recall that information as you're drawing for a more serious piece. A lot of people who study poses are generally going to do what you call like croquis or gesture drawings. And that's good because you're getting a relative sense of how to draw the form quickly and efficiently, but it's not always going to give you the best sense of anatomy. It's not going to give you the best sense of proportion. Studying gesture is just a good way to get a sense of form and movement. If you're struggling to be able to work with proportion and other things like that, then you might need to study differently. There's definitely a lot of ways to study anatomy, just using anatomy as an example. And it's really up to you to learn what works. Something that I started with a couple years ago and I never really figured out until recently was using the boxes for the torso and the waist. It just didn't make sense to me. And the reason why was because using different methods like the bean shape for the torso or using the box method for the torso, those are all good. However, they don't necessarily rely on the shapes themselves. They rely on a very light understanding of anatomy and like things like your collarbones, your muscle placement, etc. And so the issue for me was trying to draw out the human forms while using, you know, the bean or the box method. I wasn't necessarily getting it just because I didn't take the time to understand anatomy. That was my fault. But I also found that different methods of understanding the body's proportion helped me a lot in generating a better understanding of form and proportion, irregardless of my understanding of anatomy. That is to say that the box and beam method was good if I knew a little bit more about anatomy, and now that I do, I'm able to apply it better. But when I was just trying to jot down composition and form and movement, I was really struggling because of that. And so I found that different methods worked better for me. So the key of recognizing what makes good or bad mileage is just to recognize the strengths and weaknesses in each exercise that you're doing. Truth be told, that each exercise you could do could be beneficial in some form of way or another, but depending on your level of art or just your understanding of the fundamental, it might not be the best for that moment. And so you could benefit from different exercises or different ways of studying rather than the ones you're currently doing. That will definitely help your mileage a lot better than, say, just struggling with something and struggling to force yourself to understand a concept where you aren't really seeing that much improvement over a substantial amount of time. The key is to take those exercises that you simply are not understanding and just rotating them, rotating them through and building up a good workflow, because at the end of the day, each art fundamental that you're going to learn, you're just constantly building on top of it. You aren't going to study anatomy for 4 weeks and then understand how to draw the human form at every angle, at every shape, at every perspective. Because if that were the case, then, well, you and I would be extremely successful artists, right? The truth is that it does take time, and most of the time people are going to be using references and stuff like that anyways. So it's important to understand that the art progress for which you may want to move forward might not be as fast as you think it is. However, I can almost guarantee you that rotating the study rather than just being fixated on one thing is going to allow you to better grow yourself as an artist, to say. The last one that I'm going to talk about is going to be something that is a little more obvious, but I want to touch on this further. Studying different artists. I know a lot of people are probably going to practice a different artist color palette or their painting method, but it's also important to take the time to, put a piece from them that you really like and just plop it on a layer, put on some transparency, and then draw over that layer. Draw the important lines for, like, if they have a composition with a vanishing point, draw the vanishing point. And find out what exactly they put within that composition to keep the eye moving along with the perspective of the drawing, the character, etc. It is very important to allow yourself to understand where those artists are coming from and what it is exactly that they did to generate those ideas. So obviously, if you have access to their Patreon or anything else, I highly suggest supporting them, especially if they have, those PSD or Clip Studio files that you're able to purchase, dissect, and look at. It's just all part of the process, and it is very worth it to study those artists at a deeper level than what you are just able to see from, just the picture that they posted. All in all, thank you for watching my video. This is obviously just based off of my own improvement and my own process, but I truly do hope that you guys learned something, and if there's any points in this video that I can touch on further, then I gladly will in the future. The biggest one is obviously just allow yourself to actually draw. Just draw, learn your fundamentals, learn your processes, learn what does and doesn't work, and really just enjoy it. Start to apply those fundamentals to everything that you see in life, and the way you look at things will definitely change. I mean, I was like looking at buildings the other day, and I was like seeing the vanishing point. I'm like, oh my god, I did not notice this when I was younger. It really is something that you have to train yourself for. So granted, however much you want to improve, it is going to take time. Just allow yourself to be encapsulated by and enjoy the process. Even through all its struggles, you could still make it enjoyable. So I really hope you guys can learn from that. All right. Have a good one.